October 25, 1997. The once mighty Mobutu Sese Seko lay in exile, a broken man, dying in a foreign land. Just months earlier, he had ruled one of Africa's richest nations, Zaire, with the arrogance of a monarch and the ruthlessness of a general. He had paraded in leopard skin hats, carried a carved ivory cane, and flown the Concorde to his jungle palace while his people starved. His fall was spectacular, but it was no accident. It was the direct result of 3 decades of the most obscene kleptocracy Africa, perhaps the world, had ever witnessed. But how did a boy named Joseph Desire Mobutu, born in the Congo Free State in 1930, rise to become the embodiment of corruption, wealth, and dictatorship? To understand the man, we must start with the Congo itself, a nation cursed by abundance. The Congo was no ordinary colony. It was a land of unimaginable mineral wealth: copper, cobalt, gold, diamonds, uranium. But from the days of King Leopold II's brutal personal rule, that wealth had been bled for outsiders. When independence came in June 1960, the Congo was a house with no foundations, vast, rich, but politically hollow. Mobutu entered the scene as a young army officer with ambition burning in his veins. Charismatic, calculating, and utterly loyal to himself, he seized power in 1965 through a coup. From that moment, he never let go. Mobutu understood one truth: in Congo, power meant access to wealth. And he built a system where every resource, every mine, every foreign loan, every diplomatic handshake flowed into one place: his pocket. He invented what scholars would later call a kleptocracy, government by theft. By the 1970s, Mobutu's name had become synonymous with corruption. While civil servants went unpaid and hospitals ran out of medicine, Mobutu treated the national treasury as his personal wallet. Western powers, blinded by Cold War politics, poured billions into his hands because he promised to keep communism out of Central Africa. America, France, Belgium, all kept him in power. And Mobutu repaid them not with reforms, but with contracts, diamonds, and strategic loyalty. In 1973, Mobutu announced his grand project, Zairianization. He claimed it was about taking back the economy from foreign exploiters. In reality, it was organized plunder. Businesses, factories, plantations, seized overnight and handed to Mobutu's cronies, ministers, and relatives. Within years, these enterprises collapsed from incompetence. Production plummeted, the economy bled, but Mobutu grew richer. The irony? While he preached authenticity, demanding citizens adopt African names and abandon European dress, he himself lived like a European monarch. He renamed the Congo to Zaire, and Joseph Desire Mobutu became Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Ngbendu Waza Banga, the all-powerful warrior who goes from conquest to conquest. But his true conquest was the national treasury. If one place captures Mobutu's kleptocracy, it is Gbadolite. Once an obscure village in the northern jungle, Mobutu transformed it into his personal Versailles. Imagine marble palaces shimmering in the equatorial sun, a private runway long enough for the supersonic Concorde, nuclear bunkers hidden underground, a Coca-Cola bottling plant, satellite communication towers, luxury villas for foreign guests. Here, Mobutu threw feasts where lobsters and champagne were flown in from Paris, while peasants just outside the palace gate starved. He welcomed Pope John Paul II and French presidents to his jungle court, presenting himself as a modern African king. Gbadolite was both a monument to his grandeur and a grave marker of Zaire's squandered potential. But the grandeur of Mobutu's palaces stood in stark contrast to the decay of his nation. Roads crumbled into dust, schools became shells, hospitals turned into morgues for lack of medicine. Civil servants developed a survival motto, Article 15, Débrouiller vows, get by however you can. Corruption was no longer a crime, it was a survival strategy. Mobutu didn't just steal from the people. He made every official steal in order to eat, binding them all into his web of patronage. And through it all, Mobutu strutted in public wearing his trademark leopard skin cap, dark glasses, and flowing robes. The image of a modern pharaoh ruling a nation sinking into misery. By the 1980s, Mobutu was listed among the world's wealthiest men. His personal fortune was estimated at $5 billion, stashed in Swiss accounts and invested in villas from Belgium to the French Riviera. At one point, His annual personal salary was larger than Zaire's entire health and education budgets combined. Zaire, once the crown jewel of Central Africa, had been reduced to a corpse, picked clean by its own ruler. Every empire built on theft eventually eats itself alive. By the late 1980s, Mobutu Sese Seko's Zaire, once paraded as a model of African nationalism, was rotting from within. His palaces still gleamed, but his country was bankrupt. His allies in Washington and Paris were growing restless. And for the Congolese people, the mask had fallen. Their so-called savior had turned out to be the greatest predator in their history. By 1988, Zaire's foreign debt had ballooned to nearly $10 billion. Schools had no chalk, hospitals no drugs, civil servants no salaries. The economy, once fed by copper and cobalt exports, was now in ruins. Mobutu's government could not account for hundreds of millions of dollars in missing export revenue, money that had simply evaporated into Swiss accounts. Ordinary people paid the price. Hyperinflation devoured wages, and Article 15, débrouiller as vows, became the national creed: steal, cheat, hustle, or die. Mobutu had institutionalized corruption so thoroughly that the state no longer functioned. And yet, he continued to host banquets at Gbadolite, his Versailles in the jungle, feasting on champagne and caviar flown in by Concorde. The Cold War ends, and so does the patience of the West. Mobutu's greatest shield was not his army nor his secret police, but geopolitics. For decades, the United States and its allies turned a blind eye to his kleptocracy because he was their man in Central Africa, a bulwark against communism. He was courted in Washington, toasted in Paris, and celebrated in Brussels. But in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War ended. Suddenly, Mobutu was no longer the indispensable ally. Western leaders began demanding reforms, accountability, even democracy. Mobutu responded with his trademark cynicism, announcing sham political reforms while continuing to loot in the shadows. But the world had changed, and so had Zaire's patience. The 1990s were Mobutu's reckoning. Student protests shook Kinshasa. Soldiers mutinied over unpaid wages. Looting spread like wildfire across cities. The man who once controlled everything with iron precision now found his grip slipping. And then came the final blow: the Rwandan genocide of 1994. Millions of refugees and armed militias poured across the eastern border into Zaire. Mobutu's territory became the staging ground for regional chaos. Neighboring leaders, Rwanda's Paul Kagame, Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, saw in Mobutu's weakness an opportunity. They backed a rebellion led by Laurent Desire Kabila. By 1996, the rebels marched westward. Mobutu's once mighty army, hollowed by corruption and neglect, disintegrated without a real fight. Villages celebrated the rebels as liberators. The Leopard King had no claws left. In May 1997, after 32 years of iron-fisted rule, Mobutu fled his country. His departure was not heroic, not defiant. It was pitiful. A private jet whisked him away as Kabila's forces entered Kinshasa. The man who had once hosted popes, kings, and presidents in Gbadolite was now a refugee, rejected even by the foreign patrons who once bankrolled him. Mobutu wandered in exile between Morocco and Togo before settling in Rabat. There, stripped of power, ravaged by cancer, he died on September 7, 1997. No state funeral in Zaire. No monuments. His empire of theft had collapsed, leaving behind only ruins and memories of excess. Mobutu's kleptocracy left scars that still define the Democratic Republic of Congo today. The collapse of infrastructure, the normalization of corruption, the mountains of debt, the distrust of government, all are part of his poisonous legacy. He proved that a man could steal billions from his people and still be embraced by the so-called guardians of democracy abroad. Historians now call him the archetype of the kleptocrat. He did not simply loot a treasury, he dismantled a nation. He wore leopard skins and designer suits while millions walked barefoot. He built palaces in the jungle while his citizens lived in crumbling huts. He turned one of Africa's richest lands into one of its poorest countries. And yet, Mobutu's story is not just about one man's greed. It is about a system of global hypocrisy. Western powers poured money into his hands, knowing it would vanish, because he served their interests. The IMF and World Bank lent billions, while peasants starved. Mobutu was a thief, but he was not alone. He was enabled, applauded, and armed by the world's superpowers. Mobutu Sese Seko died in exile, but his ghost still haunts the Congo. His kleptocracy remains a warning that when leaders treat nations as private bank accounts, when the world rewards corruption for political convenience, the cost is not measured in dollars, but in shattered societies. Mobutu once called himself the all-powerful warrior who goes from conquest to conquest. History has given him another title, the Leopard King who devoured his own country. Have you subscribed? If you haven't, please do, so you will be notified each time I post a documentary video like this.